Let's make sure I haven't missed anything. Right.
You got your pen?
I've got my pen actually, yeah.
Yeah, be doing a bit of pointing.
Well, coming up, big concerns about media transparency just will not go away. Hello and welcome to IDCom's Media Snack, episode 44. So, transparency, media transparency is not going away. Everything is about transparency right now. There's loads of things. Today we're going to focus on a few of the many stories that are out there at the moment, all coming up on Media Snack in just the time it takes to eat a sandwich. So first off, lots of stories about transparency. This thing's not going away, of course it's not, because now advertisers are starting to get smart and make decisions and take action. One of the most interesting things that has happened this week was a story out of Japan.
That's right.
Where Toyota and Dentsu, who have a relationship going back, I think, since the Second World War, it goes back like 50 odd years, seem to be somewhat at a disagreement over the way that the agency's been charging for media, digital media.
Yeah, so this is an amazing story. Dentsu is the biggest advertiser by a country mile in Japan. It accounts for 25% of the 65 billion that is spent in advertising in Japan. And its founding client, Toyota, they've had a relationship, as you said, since World War II. Anyway, Toyota have accused Dentsu or some of Dentsu's digital agency of overbilling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Overcharging them.
Overcharging them for inventory, we think.
Yeah.
But not just recently, over the last 5 years. And, obviously this has put at odds the deep trust and the deep relationship that has been established, for decades between these two massive businesses.
Yeah. And it's interesting, particularly, it's most interesting to those of us that, are close to the media industry, because Japan, just because it's Japan, because it's a market where there's very little media auditing.
That's right.
Majority of rebates where they exist in market are retained by the agency. There's often contracts between advertiser and their agencies, and these are full service media buying and advertising, digital agencies. Sometimes they even own some of the media that they're buying on behalf of their clients. So there's always been huge potential for conflicts of interest in Japan, but it was a market built on trust. And advertisers in Japan trust their agencies, and it's worked like that for many years. And there's never really been any stories of any agency acting untoward or not in the interests of its agency. And this is the first time it's come out in a major way, which is a massive deal, because in a market which has relied on trust and a gentleman's agreement in place of any deep contracts and auditing, that has been now revealed to be a bit more fragile than it
Absolutely.
was thought.
And what I think is particularly worrying for perhaps Dentsu is that the concern has been raised by their most precious client. Now, if you're not Toyota, yet you are the one of thousands of brands and advertisers that work with Dentsu, you'd also be, making some very alarming phone calls at the moment. Because if Dentsu have been untoward and practicing in an opaque way with their most precious client, you'd have concerns about the way that they're operating with you as a business as well. So I'd imagine that there's a number of very heated and challenging phone calls taking place in Tokyo around now.
Yeah. So this is something that will follow. It flows nicely onto thinking about other markets in the world. As I say, this is the first thing that's come out of Japan of any significance. We think that the information was leaked. It will be interesting to see whether there are other leaks that start to happen, either from advertisers or agencies. As these tensions in the relationship start to emerge. We saw Obviously, issues coming out of the US, not least highlighted by the ANA reporting last year. Issues last year in Australia, which caused some kind of consternation. There's been some, challenges in the UK just over agency share deals and things like that. Right. Changes of legislation across Europe, different European countries when it comes to management of rebates. It's, the demand from an advertiser to get greater transparency over the way their agencies operate has never been higher.
That's right.
There's been, there continues to be a lot of denial on the agency side. Some of the press has even reported the Dentsu Media CEO, Jerry Ballman, continuing to dismiss the allegations made in the A&A rebate report.
And this was actually before.
Before then, this exposure now. So they're obviously going to have to account for, how important they think trust and transparency actually is to the relationship, given that there's questions over them right now.
But I think the A&A report did two things. The first was that it raised media's profile within the corporate agenda. But secondly, it made people more aware of practices. And so they are and have become more likely to spot and question when things just don't seem right. And I think that's probably what's happened in the case of Toyota in Japan.
So let's just think, from a marketer's perspective, when these things come out, right? I mean, there's been a lot of attention on the US this year and different parts of the world, but this is now Japan. It's another one. It's another thing that's popped up. As a global marketing head or a CMO, media director, I mean, what should you be thinking? Do you just react to these things? What can you be doing proactively?
I don't think you do react to these things. I think, they've now, spent the last 6 months getting their house in order, understanding kind of where they are contractually, where they are in terms of exposure to audit or lack of audit. What I think brands should be doing now, marketeers should be doing now, is putting in place a roadmap to bring more control internally and begin to ask themselves some interesting and perhaps tricky questions. So, what is your ambition for media? What does media do to grow your business? If you can't answer that, then you're never going to be able to get the best out of the agency. But if you can, you should be able to define what role you want your agency to play in delivering against that objective. And if you've got that as a platform, then things become easier. You're able to establish a good contract that delivers against your requirements from your agency. You can put in place an infrastructure, an organizational structure that is reflected then by your agency partner, so you get the best out of both. So I think answering those two questions internally, bringing back control, I think is probably what most marketing leaders, if they already don't do that, should be doing now. That's good advice. I mean, I think one of the things that we should say is in a couple of weeks, I think on the 5th of October, we're running another media transparency workshop. We'll leave details below. I think it's at 3 p.m. UK time, which is 10 a.m. Eastern time. So if you want to join us for that, because we're going to dig into some of these things. Let's go right back to the basics. The contract, of course, should reflect and detail the spirit and the nature of the relationship between the advertiser and the agency, and that has to be robust and that you can rely on it. But you can't just take a template of a contract or somebody else's contract and do that, because the requirements, as you say, of the advertiser from a media perspective are very different. And in our experience, in many businesses that don't have a point of view on media. They really don't. Despite spending hundreds of millions of dollars on media, will see it somewhat as a cost to the business and something which can be delegated off to the agency. And I think that that's inherent in perhaps some of the issues that we're seeing in Japan, particularly, but in other markets, which is a client like Toyota, with great goodwill and trust of the agency, just kind of delegating off responsibility for oversight of that spend to the agency. And then 5 years later, so no surprise perhaps, they're finding out things that they maybe wouldn't have done had they had more control over that money. So getting that control, you've got to design it, you've got to come right back to understand what media is going to do for the business. Absolutely. I think, and then work through that. So we'll run through that in the workshop. So please join us in a couple of weeks.
Okay, that's all for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.
Have a good weekend.